So that's, what does decentralization look like for society? What does decentralization look like for democracy? Now we're going to go into what does decentralization look like for organizing, right? The work that we do in our communities, the work that we do, in terms of the Green Party of the United States on the national level, which we'll get into that in a minute. But decentralization allows for more fluidity and adaptability on the local level, right? And this is super important for a continental grassroots party. And I really want people in the United States on the left to kind of take this idea in that we're doing continental organizing. We're organizing on a massive geographic scale, right? In 2018, I was in Amsterdam and I met with a Green City councilor from Amsterdam. And one of the things I walked away struck by was she could get anywhere in her country in 2 hours on public transit. Anywhere in the country, she could be there on public transit in 2 hours. I can't get out of my state in 2 hours. And public transit, I mean, I guess there's Amtrak a few times a day that will get me there eventually, right? But it'd be faster in my car. Right. So I think we really need to kind of have that understanding. And what does that mean? What does being continental organization mean? It means that we really have to be fluid and collaborative in kind of working with the various regional and different geographic needs, right? I said it in the next one, decentralization allows chapters and organizers to focus their energies on issues that align with their unique local conditions, right? What the climate crisis looks like plays out differently in California than the Midwest than the Gulf, right? What environmental action looks like can vary greatly from place to place. If we're totally top down and taking orders from the top, it's going to be really hard for us to align. And I've done this, right? I've worked in organizations where the directions came from the top, and I felt like I was slamming my head against the wall, trying to explain that top expectation didn't apply to my community. So decentralization allows us to say we're fighting, we're taking action on the climate, but what it looks like it's different in different communities. And by being able to adapt and engage in issues like this and in ways that relate to our local communities, our work is more likely to connect with community members, right? If you're Garrett, where they're fracking the hell out of Pennsylvania, right? Engaging in anti-fracking activities makes a whole lot of sense. If you're in Illinois, where the Sierra Club and the Illinois Environmental Council got together with the Democratic Party and the oil and gas industry and legalized it, but we still don't have enough for it to be economical, and there's not a single fracked well here, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of a sense for us to engage in that. So if we got a top-down order to engage on to push back on fossil fuel usage, for instance, fracking is going to be key over there, right? But in Illinois, we're going to want to be talking about pipelines because in South Central Illinois, we have a Enbridge hub where the Dakota Access goes to, the Keystone hits. Like, we've got multiple pipelines hitting in one town and then shipping out to the Gulf or shipping out to the East Coast, right? So what it looks like is different. And if you come into most of Illinois talking about fracking, people are going to stop listening to you, right? If you go to Southern Illinois and talk about it, they'll listen, because if it happens, that's where it's going to happen. But it hasn't really happened yet. So it looks different. And then decentralized organizing allows our members to engage on issues they're passionate about in ways that best utilize their skills and allows party resources to be devoted where members and energy should be focused. So decentralization makes it harder for us to put together large coordinated campaigns, right? Because the resources and direction aren't flowing from top down. It's harder for us to effectively coordinate, say, a national day of action. But what decentralization allows us to do is to tailor these broad issues that bring together what is the Green Party into our local concerns and our local actions. So decentralized organizing is really an important kind of methodology for organizing, because it flips that power dynamic, right? When you work with a group like the Sierra Club, it tends to be top down, right? They tell you what we're going to do, and you're part of we, but you didn't get a vote, right? You weren't in that backdoor meeting. You weren't in that backroom meeting where they decided what we were going to do. And so when you engage in decentralized grassroots organizing, it flips that script and it brings power to people. And when people get that power and begin to understand that power and are allowed to engage in ways that excite them, right, then that's when you can actually, start to harness the power of people against, this massive amount of money and institutional power we're facing up against.
Yeah, and actually, I think it's important to throw in there that it's not necessarily an either or. It's a process of building. That's what organizing is about. It's about building. It's about building the structures and the power necessary to carry out our bigger goals, to make the bigger systemic change that we're really looking for. So, one way to do that is to get folks excited and passionate. Well, they're already excited and passionate about whatever's going on in their community. They live that every day. They understand the importance of that and what the problems are and why they need to be tackled. So we want to start by listening. If you've heard our old organizing 101s, right? You do more listening than preaching, right? You listen to them first and you hear their concerns and you encourage them, you empower them. You say, how can I help you with those local things? And that's part of our network. That's part of our party. How can we help each other with these local things? And eventually that builds to a larger national or continental movement, because if we're looking at those local events, but connecting them back to capitalism, connecting them back to the root causes of all these problems, it initially looks like every local or region is looking at different problems, but you're slowly building a movement where we're all recognizing that, no, these are actually all stemming from the same underlying issues. And that's the powerful moment where that local organizing turns into national organizing. It turns into this big mass movement, which is what we ultimately need. But it starts local, and it starts in this decentralized thing where you want to focus on the important things in each community and help those organizers with those local issues that can easily reach people and bring them into the movement.
Yeah, and and allowing people to engage in things they're passionate about in ways that they, that highlight their skills. There's nothing worse than saying I want to be involved and then be giving a task that's not suited for you whatsoever. Right? That's why we have to listen first. That's why we have to have conversations. That's why we have to be real grassroots and not AstroTurf. Right?
Yeah. And why it's so important to have an educational movement as part of this broader movement for socialism. We're engaging here in the Green Socialist Organizing Project, but also the Youth Caucus and the Green Party and all sorts of other organizations. The important way to start is through education. Like I said, connecting those local issues to the broader, the root issues at the core of all this, at the core of capitalism and hierarchy and all those problems. And in the meantime, making sure that we're providing resources to people, which, like Chris says, includes listening to them, what they're passionate about, finding out what their skills are, and linking them to the things that can put their skills to use toward the things they're interested in. And if they don't have skills in that particular topic, to set up mentoring and training programs, and also that we are building skills. That's a good way to burn out organizers, to throw everything on one person. Part of your education movement has to be training folks to become organizers themselves and go off and keep organizing, right? Keep building the movement.
Yeah, and a prime example of that kind of pulling everything back, to those key values, right? That I always think of is the LGBTQIA organization ACT UP. It was founded during the AIDS crisis, and they had this just one. They were radical, and confrontational, but they had this ability to hit on across all sectors of society, but always come back to the AIDS crisis, right? So one day they're at Wall Street And they're protesting outside the stock exchange about their complicity in the AIDS crisis. And then the next day they're at the CDC, and then the next day they're at Pfizer, right? And then the next day they're at the county health department, right? And they were able, and that gives like a kind of a breadth of who you're impacting, right? And who you're speaking to. And it also allows for, if you've got all these different targets that you're going for, it allows for people to kind of work where they want to work, where they're passionate about, right? The one person who was turned away from their county health department is probably going to be more passionate about getting to, going to that and organizing around that county health department protest as compared to the person who can't afford their meds and is going to want to go after big pharma, right? So by the decentralization allows people to kind of track to what they're interested in. And then you kind of see this natural, organic, this is what we're doing, right? And instead of there being a meeting where you go through strategic planning, which is incredibly important and you should totally do, but instead of, coming through this like academic top-down people in the room decision about the path of your organization, when you start organizing in a decentralized way, all of a sudden you're going to kind of see these nodes of activity popping up, right? And as they start popping up, your organization's job is to start feeding them, right? These are the areas that people are passionate about working in. These are the areas where we're getting traction, right? These are the areas where we found a void and no one else is talking about it. And so instead of saying, oh, I know you really like that issue, and I know you've got all kinds of people coming out to your stuff, but like we had a meeting and we said we were doing this thing, right? That's a top-down authoritative organizing that we're trying to get away from. And in that example, it's actively stifling, right, activity and growth. So when we do this kind of decentralized organizing, it's a huge benefit for us that it allows people to engage where they want to engage in the ways that they want to engage, and then it allows this kind of organic bubbling up of what is actually important in our community, right? Because a lot of times if I put out a survey, right, that's what each individual thinks, and if I'm not surveying the community if I'm not casting a wide net, I'm going to get a very isolated view. So the ability for decentralized organizing to shift and adapt and take on what is, moving people is essential to our growth, I would say.